Now you'll see that we've started the video off with the chassis underside facing upwards this time. I wanted to show you guys what I've done underneath. I've completely recapped the set now. We've done away with the filler cans. There was two in here, a 50 and a 100, 25 and a 16 can, and then we had a 4 microfarad capacitor just on the side here. Now that's the only one I restuffed because the rest were metal core and I didn't really see the use in doing it, but I wanted to keep some originality. We've done all the wax capacitors, just those ones with the yellow type that we all seem to use, and I hadn't done them all until just before I began to shoot the video that I realised I had missed one. And the area I had missed one in is this area here. Now you'll see that there's a part of the radio sitting on my workbench, and the reason that's there is because, if you can make out on the picture here, there was two sets, tuning sets here. There was aerial and there was oscillator. Now I had to remove this aerial tuning assembly, which comes out with the ease of a few screws. Quite easy job to get one of the wax capacitors that was in the back here. That wax capacitor, shown in this diagram here, was C3. And that was a 0.05 microfarad capacitor. So in order to get to that and replace it, I had to remove the assembly from here, leaving the bottom in. I didn't have to remove the oscillator. So, quite nicely done. It's held on these two wires. Give me enough access to get in and do it. I've just dry fitted the new capacitor which I put in, and I thought it was a really good idea, because I really thought access to this would have been very difficult, but once I got reading how to remove these, it made sense why there was one there. So all we need to do is get this soldered up, and then this will be reinstalled into the set. Now I understand that I told you once I had soldered the new capacitor on, I was going to then put this tuning assembly back in the chassis. However, something just dawned on me, and that was when I came to remove the tuning capacitor, I had a lot of bother reaching the brass nuts and washers which were below the chassis, bolting it on, because this tuning assembly was very close up to the chassis wall and I could barely get my screwdriver in. So I've decided that before we put the tuning assembly back in its place here, we're going to put the tuning capacitor back on. This is the tuning capacitor now, looking very shiny and quite new. It's all been painted. You cannot get paint on here because it would reduce, it would just stop working. It wouldn't do its job if it had paint on it. So it's always important that if you're painting certain areas, you mask these off and do the rest. So with these two brass screws, it bolts onto the underside of the chassis, and I should hopefully just be able to guide those through the holes just like that and pull them through slightly with my long nose pliers, and then put the washers and some of the bolts back on. So that's actually the tuning capacitor on pretty tight. I'll tighten up in a bit. So this tuning assembly, you can see here, it's got the coils along, just in the camera, it's got the coils along here, this new capacitor I've just put in, and what it does is, it fits through here. We post that wire up through the top of the chassis, and once that gets through, I need to guide that through with my screwdriver also. Once that comes through, we are able to usually get everything else in. and then the tuning assembly sits in there, you'll remember. Now it's held on with 2 screws at the top, and then we have to put the support brace back in, just like the one here, and then that's reinstalled. So if you give me a moment, I'll go ahead and do that. It's pretty fiddly work and may take a little bit of time, so just give me a moment and I'll come back. Well, what do you think so far? You'll see that there's been a lot of work done since last time. The mystery thing that I wasn't telling you I'd put on was the speaker again. So the speaker's back on, the transformer's back on, and now we've got that tuning capacitor back on. No dial cord yet, no dial, but those are going to be all the fun jobs for part 6. We're just getting all the main jobs done just now. In fact, forget that. We are going to be doing dial cord in this video. I've decided I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you guys how I do it. It's usually quite tricky to do with these radios because it goes through that recess in the chassis around the control knob there. But we'll get it done. The cans have been shined up at the back. I'll turn it around in a moment. But all new terminals have been put back on again. I cleaned up some of the old wires. I replaced some of the old wires. That was a full fabric wire. That was all good until there, so I just heat shrinked the middle. I wanted to keep it. I'm just one of those, I keep as much original as I can. If it involves a little work, I'll do it. So the dial bulb, you know, I'll go on the dial. That'll be mounted on in part 6. But for those of you who are very observant, you'll notice there's no waveband switch. Some people will say, well, why is that? Well, that's because this waveband switch here had to be removed so I could remove those tuning plates that I was in there, the aerial tuning coils and the oscillator coils, to put that capacitor in. So this is the last job really. We have to reinstall this, and it's just a matter of sliding it through and putting the 2 screws on, and then that's done also. And then we'll tackle this dial cord. Now according to the schematic, I think it's something like 18 inches or something. You can see the path that it does there. It goes round the spindle once, 1.5 turns. The idle wheel, which is that small wheel there, goes round there. And it goes in a recess on one of these areas here. So that shouldn't be too difficult. Just says that 18 inches of cord known to the manufacturer's green number 1D. I won't have that, but I'll have dial cord. Required to replace the tuning drive, and this length allows an ample margin for tying off. So for tying off behind the wheel there. So I'll get that cut, and I'll get that switch put in, and then I'll come back again. And there's the switch back together. Now when I had it out, I realised how rusty that shaft was. Some of you viewing may have thought that too. So I took care of that and cleaned it. I promise you, because I never realised there was so much rust back there. Now I have gone and I've cut the dial cord, but before I say that, I'm going to show you something else I did whilst I was off camera. In the set, there was a few resistors which had gone, well, really bad. You can see a 27k resistor there, that was reading 37, and you can see a 1 meg and a 1.2 meg. Now both of those 1 and 1.2 megs were only reading just over 500,000. Instead of going up, they went down, which is, well, that's quite unusual. You know, they normally go up, but they're replaced. All 3 are done. That's just another job you need to look at. Check all your resistors. I think this radio only had about, I think it was 16 resistors in it, but 3 out of 16's, that's enough. But all the rest are within spec. As long as they're within 20%, you should be okay. So moving those to the side, here's the new piece of dial cord. 18 inches exactly. I'm just using some older stuff. I showed it in one of my first videos. Actually, I used it on that Bush DAC 90A, and I've not had any regrets with it so far. So here goes. Move the camera down. Here's a disc, okay, and a spring. Disc's all shined up, looking good. And this is the little spring. Now all I'm doing is tying one end of this string through like that, and then we're just going to tie a little knot. It says that there's ample amounts for tying off on this, so we're just going to, you can cut some off but you can add some on. So I'm just going to knot that like so. Give it a good old pull, and that's it knotted to the spindle, okay? Not the spindle, the spring. Now you will all know, if you've worked on an old radio, the spring goes on like so, and then the dial cord fits through a margin like so. Just getting it through is often a bit of a problem. Clean that hole out a little. It's always important you do this with your dial cord. I mean, if you don't, it'll end up breaking on you and you'll be pretty annoyed, I'm sure. So that pulls that right through, like so. Put that back on there. Wants to keep going off. There we go, that's one piece done. Moving the camera up and over a bit. We now need to think of the direction which it follows. You can see it comes out that end, and then it goes down to the spindle under the chassis. I've decided that the best way of getting the cord around the spindle is to pass it through underneath the chassis itself, through that spindle. That way I can still see what I'm actually doing. The cord just came through there, and I'm just going to give it a slight tug, pull some excess through, post back through the recess again, and hope that it comes out the top. Unfortunately, folks, there is no easy way of doing it. Just got to be patient, take your time, not get angry with it like so many seem to do. Right, and then give it another pull. It's caught on my dial lamp all of a sudden. See folks, this is just one of the fun jobs of radio repair. You just never know how long one thing is going to take you. Well, after another 5 minutes of filming I managed to get it, so that's that round here again, and around the wheel. So really, if we can keep it like this just now, I'll then show you my little trick for tightening it up round that wheel. You can see we've tied both ends up. So by tying both ends up, and we've wound it round the spindle underneath, connected this shaft 1.5 times. So now all we have to do is bring it up and attach it to the tuning capacitor, placing some of the strain on this idle wheel here. Now that's sometimes easier said than done, but we're going to try and do it just now. You can see, I'm going to have to move the camera back slightly so I have some room. There's a capacitor there. And there's there. Push that on. Now the issue we're now having is I never used enough of that tension. There's not enough tension on this dial string at the moment. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to go under and try and wind it round once more on this handle, or just undo my knot slightly and try it again. But this is giving us an idea of what we're doing. That's that dial cord on, it's just not tight enough. Obviously the 18 inches has given us quite a lot of levy for tying it up. So I'm going to go back inside, undo my other knot, and tie it even more with more excess hanging over. And the idea is it'll tension this up even more. And there we have it. You can see it now moves very freely without too much trouble. Now the next stage to complete this entire dial assembly is to put 2 screws in. These older radials with these tuning dial assemblies use screws similar to these, and you can see that these are almost countersunk. They go right in the brass cylinder connected to the wheel and connect it to the variable tuning capacitor. So once we put these 2 in, it then allows the control to move the variable tuning capacitor, because at the moment that's just spinning on the shaft, but it's nice and free moving, which is what we wanted. I put these in just by using a magnetic screwdriver. Turn it until I can see them. I'll need to bring this out closer up so you guys can just make out what I'm doing there. To about there. That should work fine. And then we're just lining it up with the hole before gently turning it until we catch that thread. I still want to oil this idle wheel we see here and give the disc a good clean. You can see my handprints all over it. The oil I use is just some oil I would use on a clock. I just put some of that in there. This idle wheel seems to stick. We're just putting it all over the shaft in there. That usually helps things quite a bit. Nice and free moving. So that's the dial cord back on, folks. It's getting rather late and I'm thinking of going to bed, but this is work finishing on this now, and we will commence in part 6. But now it's all the fun jobs. All the major jobs are done. We've got the variable tuning capacitor back on and soldered up. We've got the transformer on, soldered up, and we've got the speaker on, soldered up. And we've recapped the radio. Not to mention some of those resistors that we had to change over to. So this radio really should be ready to go. Part 6, I do hope to get up tomorrow.